Well, hello, and thank you for joining me today. I've got a very special guest, and we're going to be talking about how ancestral health and how being a modern hunter-gatherer may help you improve your health and really beat the scourge that is modern disease. Now, Dr. Gould, thank you so much for joining me today. This is a really interesting concept, the rise of ancestral health and being a hunter-gatherer in our modern day life is something that it's discussed now, but in the dental circle, not so much. Right. I'd love to hear the origins of how you came to this concept of ancestral health with a dental perspective. Take us back to how you came to that.
Right. Well, the first thing that people should understand is that humans evolved to be hunter-gatherers. That's really how our biology came into existence as animals on this planet. But we live in the modern world, so we really want to think about being a modern hunter-gatherer. And what that really entails is really paying attention to your surroundings, the food that you eat, the activities that you do, the radiation you're exposed to. And that's sort of the concept came up after, a really many years of problems that I had. So I think that everyone really, when they understand something that happens to them, it's a very intense experience. And I have a history right from childhood of having chronic health issues. And my discovery of what had gone wrong with my health was really kind of a shocking experience. It took me back 80 years in time when I discovered another Canadian dentist. I'm a Canadian dentist by the name of Dr. Weston A. Price. And so about 6 years ago, I discovered that I had sleep apnea, which is a very common syndrome that's happening. And that set me off on a journey that changed my perspective from a regular dentist or an allopathic dentist, classically trained, to looking at the whole body and looking really at root cause. We learn all these things in dental school, how to treat different dental diseases, but we're never truly shown the root cause of where do these issues like dental decay, gum disease, and the lack of room for all of our wisdom teeth, crowding of teeth, where does that come from? And that's the journey that I went on my own. And I found your work at some point in my journey. I came across your work, and I was extremely excited to see that someone like yourself had recognized where we sort of went off the path that we should be on as oral health doctors.
Yeah, it's so interesting. Everyone's got their own kind of way into this, but there's a lot of people kind of gravitating around this idea that we need to get back to our ancestral roots, and that a lot of the things we suffer and our patients suffer are from this disconnection and this misunderstanding that we really do have. A long-standing history of very planned and cultured traditions that create a healthy human being. So it's really interesting. How you've kind of melded all that into your career story. Right. Tell us about your personal health story. What was it that led you into thinking this way? Because I often find with practitioners, there's this personal way that they've experienced either conditions or whether it's a family member. What was it for you?
Well, the change that really happened in my life. So I was one of those kids that had terrible dental decay. I had a lot of health issues as a child. I had allergies. I had my tonsils removed. I had a series of things that happened to me, and I recognized these same things in my patients. So to give you some perspective, this is my 31st year as a clinician, as a practicing dentist. I started my career in pediatrics and hospital dentistry back in Canada, and I'm a really good observer. And so what was happening to me, where it started to all click into place, was I was always clenching and grinding my teeth from really my early 20s on, and I always wore a grinding guard. But about 7 years ago, I started having issues with anxiety and depression, things that had never happened to me before. And I was clenching my teeth, not only at night like so many people do, but I was catching myself all day long with my teeth stuck together. Now, very classic approach to allopathic dentistry is if you clench and grind your teeth, you're going to put in a grinding guard or a bruxism guard, which is very common. I'm pretty sure you do a lot of them in Australia because bruxism is everywhere. And something just wasn't right. And so as my health deteriorated, I really didn't know where to turn. None of my doctors, could put these different pieces of the puzzle together. But by accident, I found out I had sleep apnea, which led me on a road to discover vitamin D and then subsequently vitamin K2 and Weston Price. And I'm really a poster child for all of the things that can go wrong when a human animal is disconnected from their natural habitat. And what I sort of want to make clear is that when you look around you, we feel comfortable in this world. These walls, this lighting, my clothing, and the lives that we live seems normal to us, but they're really not normal. Humans didn't live like this for 99.9% of our evolutionary existence. And it's very recently that we've just moved into these really cages. And these cages that we live in, that we think are home or comfortable, they're cutting us off from the elements of life, from air, earth, fire, and water, from the natural habitat of planet Earth. And that's the environment that created our bodies. So I started to think about what had gone wrong with my health and how there are so many things that went wrong. And when I discovered really back to Weston Price, I think the most profound experience I had is when I opened up that book. He wrote a book called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. To anyone who hasn't seen that book, it has photographs taken 80 years ago of jaws and facial structures. And a picture is worth 1,000 words, because once you see how quickly a human's jaw can deteriorate in one generation, this is not an issue of genetics. This is something that happens in one generation. And Weston Price is the modern father of epigenetics, and that means above genetics. So it's your environment. It's what are you doing to yourself that is causing these problems. So I had to look back on my life and say, well, how did I turn into this sick person? I was born and raised in central Canada in a very, very cold place. And I was pretty much right off the bat born vitamin D deficient. And I also, I want to, the way you discuss ancestral health and having fat soluble vitamins, I want to give you some, breakdown of what this looks like to the parents of children and to people in general, to see what these symptoms are that maybe people brush off, like clenching and grinding. Oh, it's not a big deal. I have a grinding guard, so I protect my teeth. But what's the root cause? Bruxism is coming from the brain. It's a neurological symptom, and it's a symptom of something that we really need to start to pay attention to. So it was the combination of me going through this journey of figuring out my own health and then seeing the signs and symptoms of my own patients, seeing the broken teeth and the gum disease, people with diabetes, and starting to put these different conditions together and saying, wow, this is the progression of a disease. I'm calling it the modern epidemic because it's literally the disease of modern living, and it's caused by more than one thing. It's caused by us being cut off from literally our natural habitat. We wouldn't need to be worried about an ancestral diet if we were still living as hunter-gatherers, because there'd be no processed foods. Simple as that.
Yeah, there's no question that, as soon as we start to eat the modern diet, we start to get on this track to this situation you're describing, where we're born into a world where we're just not as adept to our immune systems aren't as strong to deal with things. We're more reactive to certain situations, and it's so common today, and we've really lost track as to where that came from and how we get back. So it's great to see how this kind of journey that you come from, and also to connecting to Weston A. Price, which was very similar to my story. I want to hear about how you first opened that book, and what were your thoughts as a modern clinician, because it doesn't exactly fit into the template of what you were taught in dental school, right? So how did you process that, and what was your kind of journey to because you talk about epigenetics in the early 1900s, these things weren't talked about, so it's really a very forward and backward kind of thinking with understanding Price, right? Yeah,
well, it absolutely is. So when I discovered Weston Price, and I said to myself, well, how would I not have heard about this guy? I went to dental school in Canada 35 years ago, a long time ago, and Weston Price grew up not far up the highway from where I went to dental school. So it was a little disturbing to just think about that. I actually called my dental school, called to talk to the dean, say, hey guys, this is still information not being taught. So it's really fascinating. But, through observation alone, Weston Price was a very bright guy. And at a time, people need to understand that, Weston Price wasn't a perfect person, because where he, in those days, Adolf Hitler was in Nazi Germany looking at epigenetics to euthanize people. This is a very dark time in our history. And this man was very forward thinking. He said, in exactly the same way that people are looking at the blue zones, everyone wants to know, well, why do people live to over 100? What's so special about a blue zone? Weston Price did something really smart. He said, my patients' teeth are terrible. I want to go somewhere where people have great teeth and natural dental health, and I want to evaluate what is it about that setting. And that's what he did. He took his wife and went on a journey around the world, and it was his observations of the different diets and the behaviors of the people that really put this together. So for me, I want you to understand that I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease at the age of 14. Now, I was one of those kids who was very sickly. I always had rashes, colds, flus, all these different issues as a child. It was really tough for me. And then at the age of 14, I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. Now, Crohn's disease is an inflammatory bowel disease. It's very much on the increase these days. And this is an embarrassing, shameful bathroom disease. So at the age of 14, I was diagnosed with this. And I was told it was genetic. This is who you are. These are your genes, and there's nothing that you're going to be able to do. You're going to take these medications, and you're going to this is just the way it is. You, for the luck of the draw, you got some bad luck. And I literally lived my life that way, thinking that there wasn't really an alternative. And I did investigate over the years with different doctors, thinking, is there a new medication I want to try? And when I got to that point where I started to have anxiety and I was grinding my teeth, I still had full-blown Crohn's disease, but I was just dealing with my symptoms. I had created a really elaborate life to hide the symptoms of my disease from everyone around me because it's embarrassing. And I had created this very strange life where I had my private bathroom issues, even so much so that in my office, I couldn't work at a dental office that didn't have a private bathroom because it was too intense for me. And it was a very big issue for most of my life. Now, when I discovered I had sleep apnea, I came across a really fantastic neurologist by the name of Stasia Gomanak. And I think you may be familiar with her name. She was the first person who had ever heard the expression vitamin D deficient. I had never heard of this. And I became very interested in her work, and her discoveries were that sleep disorders were very much tied to vitamin D deficiency through the gut microbiome, which is she's really the genius that put these pieces together. And it took me a long time to really get what she was talking about. So I went and got my first vitamin D test at the age of 48. It was 16 or 18 nanograms per milliliter because I had never been tested before. I had never taken a vitamin D supplement. I always wore sunscreen, and I was being careful of the sun. I thought I ate healthy. There's no vitamin D in a lot of food products. So when I started supplementing my vitamin D, and at first, I wasn't thinking about sun exposure. I wasn't thinking about ancestral health. I was just thinking, I have sleep apnea. This woman has some important information, and I'm going to start to raise my vitamin D level. And when I took my vitamin D level from under 20 to about 80, every single symptom I had, my bruxism, my anxiety, my depression, and most importantly, my Crohn's disease completely disappeared. Now, I was in complete shock. 34 years is a long time to be a sick person. And when I did the research, to anyone listening, if you want to Google PubMed is the medical research website that doctors use. I just typed in vitamin D, PubMed, and Crohn's disease and saw only a couple of studies, but real peer-reviewed scientific studies that took a group of people with Crohn's disease and raised their vitamin D level, and they had 95% success in reversing the disease. Now, when I went to my doctor with this information, they could have cared less. It wasn't something they weren't happy for me, but it was such a profound experience because I lived every day of my life with the bathroom. When you see those commercials where they're showing somebody from the inside of a porta potty, they're showing you somebody's looking at the line for a bathroom. That was me. That was my life. And I know a lot of people who don't have Crohn's disease still have bowel issues. They still have, constipation, or they have, IBS. And these are all just in the spectrum of this disease process. I just so happened to have a very bad case of Crohn's disease. I was very lucky I didn't have surgery. I was only hospitalized once. So I was luckier than a lot of people. And I was really devastated because I had literally created a very specific life that was very controlled because I could not be out of my world because it was just too difficult. There was too much stress in just being a regular person. So once this happened and I started to do the research, I became very upset because Weston Price's information was about vitamin D3 and vitamin K2. Weston Price's information was about eating nose to tail. How these things fit together is there's a couple of different things that make it more confusing, but modern diets are full of different toxins that lower your body's ability to activate vitamin D. So even if you are going in the sun, or if you are supplementing vitamin D, if you eat that modern diet and you don't know what's in your food, your body's ability to activate and use the vitamin D is way down. And I ate cereal. Cereal was my food. Heart healthy grains are some of the most dangerous foods in the world. And cereal was really a staple of my life because I assumed it was healthy. I believed it. And so once you have that type of intense realization of what happened with my health and seeing the studies that supported it made me really become upset. And that's where I became, and you can see behind me, you see posters. And I saw what Weston Price did, and his information never got to me. And it still isn't getting to 99.9% of dentists, never mind the general public. But dentists don't know this information, which is really tragic, a little bit scandalous. But I decided that I was going to, the buck stopped with me. I didn't want another child to go through what I went through for no good reason. To think of the 34 years I spent finding bathrooms, spending time in bathrooms, and just being a sick person, to know that it could disappear within less than 3 months. I know that I need to share and spread that message. And it's not just for sick people. This goes to the craniofacial growth and development, the face and jaw growth of your children. If you're listening to this information, it's so simple. It makes so much sense. It's kind of irrefutable. And what I want anyone listening to this who has a child to know is that I was one of those sick kids. That you have a child in your life right now who may be suffering from the syndrome that I describe. I call it long face syndrome, from mouth breathing during sleep, and it's pediatric sleep apnea. This is such an easy thing to reverse, and I've really made it my life's work to try and share this information in a really meaningful way. Not just, I'm a doctor, you should listen to me, but I wanted to do something a little different. I'm sort of more compelled to get this information out there at any cost, and that's why you're going to see me doing things that are more media driven and related. I love what you're doing. You are exactly what we need, is that common sense, steady voice saying, look, everyone, this is what we should be doing, and presenting it in such a good way. And then I'm a different voice. I'm coming in saying, I've been working on this for 6 years and I can't get many people to listen to me. So I want to go in under the radar, and I want to create cartoons, and I want to bring this into popular culture. And that's why I reached out to you with my Weston A. Price dance and song. So it was the personal connection, what happened to me, and then my experience as a clinician looking at the people, and I'd see medical histories and I'd see the same symptoms coming together. People with Crohn's disease, they also had sleep apnea. People who had cancer also had sleep apnea. So I saw this syndrome of all these sort of different symptoms that we see as clinicians on a daily basis. I saw them all come together and how they actually work. And I said to myself, I want to put this out there in a way that's going to make a difference. Something like Weston Price did by putting photos in his book, which is very, very different at that time. That was really something unusual. He wanted the public to get it. He didn't want the information to be stopped and controlled by doctors. And that's what I want to do. I want to bring this information to the mainstream like you're doing. And I wanted to make it more fun, because no one's going to do anything that's not fun. If it's drudgery, if it's like, oh, I got to do this, that's no fun. So I wanted to change the message and the tone of the message to bring it together. And the recognition of the syndrome is key, because when people see it, it's like there's a puzzle sitting right in front of you and you can't quite figure out what it is. I want to turn the light on that illuminates it so that you can see, wow, that's my health. That's what I can do for myself. I don't need doctors to tell me what to do. I want to own my own health. I want to take care of myself, and I want to be educated, and I want the right information, the important and healthful information, rather than what a message big pharma wants to sell you something. Some of those medications are important. They can save your life to a degree, but no one should be on medications for their whole life if they don't need to be. That's my thought process. It's a lot of information there.
Yeah, totally. There's a lot of information, and it all pins into your personal journey, which is just fascinating. And yeah, I really want to kind of unpin a lot of that, because I feel that there's a lot of synergy with what's happening like with people listening, but also to practitioners that are seeing patients like this. It's a very difficult interface with how we diagnose and how we understand the process. You went through a very long and kind of convoluted way to connect Weston A. Price's work with a neurologist, right, that to your sleep disorder. And so that's kind of the scientific process unpinning over 80 years, and then you sitting there and going through PubMed and then drawing all the dots together and then actually applying it on yourself. That's really fascinating. But it's a very difficult leap, as you say, for 99% of the dentists that haven't heard of Weston A. Price's work. And then I feel a lot of people just haven't really understood the implications of what he was showing. And that's it's really what you're showing is that this stuff is really important. It's applying to kids growing up today in our world who are suffering, and that we can, reverse this quite simply. So it's such a fascinating story. Let's talk about your two diagnostic journeys. So you talked about Crohn's disease and sleep apnea, and both were difficult diagnoses. You said you accidentally got a diagnosis of sleep apnea, and then tell us about how your interface with doctors, or what the advice was with how you would handle Crohn's disease in a conventional sense. Tell us about those two experiences.
Right. Well, I guess we'll start with the pediatric stuff. It's very interesting that so 30 years ago. When I first got sick, it's really, I went, you become a victim. You get told that you're a sick person, and now you've got to go into the hospital for a diagnostic. And that's going to be, in those days, it was a barium swallow or a barium enema. And being 14 is tough enough without having to think about those terms. But at that time, the diagnostics were not that modern, and I was told there was nothing wrong with me. So then I had a secondary opinion. One of my doctors said, well, you better take him to a psychiatrist because he's making this up. And, I wasn't making anything up. So the new technology came out that was a colonoscopy that actually allowed them to see and make a diagnosis. But the whole experience is really, it's devastating, especially to a young person, to be told that there's something wrong with you, and that no matter what you do, you were born this way, and there's nothing that you can do to change it, which is really harmful, and it's wrong. And even today, you may have noticed I published an ebook on reversing Crohn's disease, and I did that mostly because I want to be able to sleep at night knowing that there's people out there, kids out there, just suffering for no reason. So I wanted to really break it down to make it easy for anyone to understand, because when I did reach out to my professionals, they were really not open to it on any level. When you say vitamin anything, they shut down. And to be able to get somebody who I respect, and I approached a lot of my dental specialists around here. Nobody really got what I had to say, and it was hard for me because these are some really educated, smart people, but they weren't seeing how it was fitting into their life. And I would tell my implant specialist, your failed implants, every time your implant fails, I can guarantee you that the vitamin D level is at the root cause, and this person is not having a vitamin K2 in their life. And so the bone is just not going to be able to maintain an implant. And, my father had an implant that failed, and I was wondering, well, what goes wrong with that? So it's still even disheartening to me that I live in a very forward-thinking area. My people, my specialists, are really top-notch people. They just haven't recognized just how deep at the root cause this goes to a profession that they've dedicated their life to. And I think it's really hard for anyone who doesn't physically experience those symptoms themselves to really know. So that was, back in those days. I don't know how valuable it is to these days, but these days I know that when anyone has a GI problem, they go to a GI specialist, and the doctors are doing those tests. They're not looking at the airway. They're not looking for tonsils. Everything is very disconnected, and so all the medical specialists are, your GI specialist. I had a kid who came in. It's one of my favorite stories. He was 19 years old, and he came in because he had to have his lower retainer removed because it was metal. He was getting an MRI. And I said, well, why are you getting an MRI? He said, well, they think that they're worried I might have cancer. I've had a lot of pain, and I've got a lot of GI pain. And right away, I can see that he had a scalloped tongue. So I could see that there was an issue with his sleep. And then when I looked at his airway, his tonsils were completely occluding his airway. And so first issue is this kid is extremely vitamin D deficient. And I said to him, what's going on? I said, how's your sleep? And he said, I can't sleep anymore. And so the sleep apnea syndrome came to mind, but his GI specialist was able to put his scope in past those tonsils to see his GI, and he never got a referral to an ENT. So it's a very disconnected state of things, and it's not the doctor's fault. This is the way that medicine has developed in this country and a lot of westernized countries. When it came to the apnea part, to your listeners, I don't know, people have heard of sleep apnea. It's a gross, unappealing disease. It's a punishment. It happens to obese people who don't care about themselves. That's such a damaging message. And, when I first started to even ask my patients if they'd heard of sleep apnea, they would literally recoil in revulsion and say, I don't have that. And so when I started to get into this, I wasn't thinking about young, healthy people with sleep apnea. I wasn't thinking about myself. I never snored. I was heavy for a lot of my life, but in those recent years, I was more fit. And I was learning about how to do a sleep study at a convention. I did a sleep study myself. And in the morning, we brought down the studies to be reviewed. And I had apnea, pretty substantial apnea. And it was a surprise, but not a surprise. It was because I didn't understand the syndrome. And there's so much disinformation and misinformation about what it is. Everyone thinks it's caused by a fat neck that crushes your airway. That obesity is a result of poor sleep over many, many years. And when you see that poor person who's got diabetes and heart disease, and they're obese and they're wearing a CPAP, that's the end stage of the disease. This disease starts in childhood and youth. I have all kinds of kids who, if your child wets the bed, if they suck their thumb, if they have ADD, they're sleep deprived. I have had kids who have been snoring loudly and grinding their teeth stop snoring in as little as 2 days with vitamin D supplementation, which is really life-changing, especially for kids who do wet the bed. And thumb sucking is a really interesting one because everyone thinks that thumb sucking is a bad habit, but we do mandibular anterior devices. We do devices to hold the lower jaw forwards. That's a child putting their thumb in their mouth. They can't sleep without that thumb in there. You pull out the thumb and they'll start choking. So it's a completely different way to think about how we look at disease and what we gauge things on. Like, one of the other things that was really harmful for me is that I didn't go through puberty till I was 17. And the reason is that I wasn't sleeping because I had severely low vitamin D. And the syndrome really affects kids. If you have a child who's not developing, we see the dental age very easily. If you show me someone's x-rays, I can say that's a 10-year-old, that's a 12-year-old. So we're used to seeing that. But myself as a child, never mind the Crohn's disease, how embarrassing that is to not go through puberty till 17. You grow when you sleep. If you don't sleep properly, you're going to have stunted growth. So hopefully if any parents are listening to this, understand that there's these really obvious symptoms that you haven't heard about. Most people talk about bruxism and what causes bruxism, especially in kids. It's low vitamin D, and you can stop it immediately. And we can talk further on that, but that's what I see as a clinician. So I don't know if that sort of answered the questions that you were looking for, but so the take-home point is that I had no suspicion I had apnea. I was never told that I snored. I thought I was a great sleeper because I could fall asleep anywhere. And it turns out that's kind of a symptom of sleep deprivation, is being able to fall asleep, especially in a chair, that because you're sitting upright, your airway doesn't collapse. So when I realized that I had this, then I started looking at my patients, and I was 48. Everyone from the age of 18 to 50, I could see these signs. Some were obvious, some were not. And a lot of the people I'd say, hey, I don't want to give you a hard time, but I see these signs of early sleep apnea. Do you think that you would be interested in doing a sleep screening? And a lot of the times people would be like, yeah, I think I might have a problem. And there's a lot of almost shame with not sleeping right. People are embarrassed. It's like, oh no, I'm fine. I just have a lot on my mind. Making an excuse for yourself. Sleep is a combination of behavior and biochemistry. You have to have both.
It's a great point you bring up about the shame associated with some of these conditions. Snoring. People don't generally want to talk about it unless they're pushed to it. But also, with a chronic digestive issue, that really affects your life. You describe it so well. Put those two things together, and it's quite concerning to think that there are many people out there suffering from a two-pronged disease that they're not getting any answers from on either end. And when you put it into the perspective of a child that's growing and developing with their system struggling like this, they're not getting the deep restful sleep that goes through the all of the stages of sleep that release all the hormones like growth hormone, and then we don't develop a jaw that supports this airway and digestive system that creates a stable immune system, and then we have this really kind of inflamed system that becomes autoimmune to itself. It's really quite tragic when you describe it like that. For those trying to, because the disconnect you discussed with the medical practitioners, and this is how medical practitioners are trained, so it is how it is. It's no one's fault. But can you help resolve for some of the people out there that aren't understanding the connection between how the pathophysiology of sleep apnea connects to Crohn's disease? Can you help just draw us some of those connections there and how we pull that body together and understand, hey, these two things actually work, more or less in tandem?
Right. Well, again, that's sort of why, I call my book, The Modern Epidemic. It's a syndrome, and it looks different at different ages and stages. And ultimately, it's a broken gut microbiome that affects every part of your body. It affects your immune system. It affects your sleep. It affects your healing. It affects your mood, your emotion. And so it's kind of complex, but our gut microbiome is under attack. But there's really two big things of the issue. So I like to think of it this way, is that, we're in a symbiotic relationship with our gut microbiome, and the DNA of our gut microbes, they outnumber our DNA 100 to 1. So we really rely on those microbes. So where it comes down to it is, if you don't have the right ingredients in your body, you're not going to keep the right gut microbiome. If you don't have the right gut microbiome, you're not going to make enough serotonin, you're not going to make enough dopamine, and probably countless thousands of other chemicals that we don't even know that much about, because this is a very new part of medicine, is understanding just how the combination of the gut microbiome is connected to the brain by the gut-brain axis. And so very simply put, and this is how I like to explain it. I know that you have a little different way, but for humans to have a healthy gut microbiome, they must have an evolutionary level of vitamin D. And I'm going to say that, it's kind of variable, but I want it always over 40, or in Australia, you're nanomoles, right?
That's right.
In animals, yeah. So it gets confusing with the different figures, but it's a much higher level than most people are walking around with. And understand that if your vitamin D level is low, it's because you're wearing clothing, you live in a northern climate, and you're avoiding the sun, you're wearing sunscreen, all these different things. Without that evolutionary level of vitamin D in your body, it's going to be impossible to really keep and maintain that correct gut microbiome. Once the microbiome is gone, we lose so much, because I think one of the key features is that you make your vitamins, especially your B vitamins, from your gut bacteria. Because, everyone thinks about, we're talking about all this plant-based stuff. Everything's got to be plant-based. I got to eat the rainbow. I got to have all these veggies. There's so many thousands of years that humans didn't have access to any vegetables, and we're in starvation mode, killing an animal only when they could. The way that a bear can hibernate is because the gut microbiome can make the vitamins that we need to use on a regular basis. So once we lose the gut microbiome, we lose all of the protective elements of how our body was designed. And it ultimately comes down to the production of energy in the mitochondria. So now we've got these more scientific, things coming out, but everything comes down to the amount of power you can generate. If you don't have enough power, you cannot be a healthy person. And that gut microbiome and the vitamins that you are producing through your own bacteria are all key players in keeping the mitochondria healthy on a second-to-second basis, producing energy. The whole reason we even breathe in oxygen is to produce energy in our mitochondria. So it's complex, but it all comes down to what we need to have. These bodies evolved a specific way, and if we don't put in those correct sensory inputs, the whole system malfunctions. Now, the sleep thing is really important, because that's our nightly regeneration tool. Once the sleep breaks down, then it's just a downward spiral of negative outcomes: poor sleep, anxiety, hunger pangs, feeling like you need carbs. Low vitamin D level sends a signal to the brain to crave carbs. You go out to restaurants and stores, and all that's available is the least healthy food. And even people who think they're eating healthy by eating a lot of fruit, it's not necessarily healthy. Fruit, to me, is a treat. It's full of sugar, and the fruit that we're eating is different than our ancestors' fruit. So you need to have your rest and regenerate every night to be able to be healthy. Once you lose high quality sleep, whatever's in your genetic background starts to make its way forward, and people really break down in all kinds of ways. They're almost always tied to not proper sleep, wrong gut microbiome, and not enough energy coming from the mitochondria. That's sort of how it ties together. And
I mean,
created a whole book to put that.
Yeah, totally. But it makes sense how cellular energy and the sleep dysfunction really can kind of flow on. And then we're talking about this gut microbiome messaging system going wrong to the immune system. Then we get Crohn's disease, and it really is, like you say, it's a very complex syndrome, and people they display it in different ways. See it in patients completely different ways, but it's the same mechanism. And you're describing the fundamental building blocks of our machine, our life, right?
Basement root level, yeah. Yeah. So
I was going to say that's where dental leads us. It leads us to this fundamental understanding of the body, and then we get the fundamentals right, and we can start laying these other aspects on top. It's such great stuff, Dr. Gould. I'm going to take a question from the audience here because I think it'll lead us into some more practical questions. Tanya asks, do you recommend people to get a blood test to determine their vitamin D level, and what do you think the number should be?
All right. So I think that when I look at people's overall health and what is at the root cause of every disease that no one wants, cancer, heart disease, and dementia, vitamin D is in there. Vitamin D is at every level of your health. And I think it's the most important test. I want people to realize that when they go to their doctor and they get a cholesterol test, that the entire industry is designed around making billions of dollars on giving prescriptions to lower your cholesterol. So their focus is to get a diagnosis to sell something that's going to make them money. I personally don't believe in that. However, I think that the vitamin D test is the single most important test that you can do, because I think that if you dig deep, what you're going to see, just what I saw, you're not going to find people on this planet who have an initial diagnosis of cancer and have a very high vitamin D level. That doesn't exist. Those two conditions, cancer and high vitamin D, they don't go along together. Generally, what happens is someone finds out they have cancer and they later find out that they're very low in vitamin D. And it's not causal, but I believe that having a low vitamin D level allows cancer to develop. And that's what the science that I very clearly see shows. So the answer to your question is, I absolutely recommend a vitamin D test, and definitely more than once. And I recommend people monitor and track your vitamin D. If you are a hunter-gatherer living out in the woods, you wouldn't need to do that. But because you're a modern human, I absolutely agree that this should be tracked. I personally want my patients to have a level of 150 to 200 nanomoles. That is the sweet spot that I want. That's a 60 to 80 for US audiences. And I want something that's over 100 is what makes me happy to see.
Makes sense. And for many people, they'll get their readings back and they'll be told that they're actually in the moderate range, and then often they have to do their own tweaking. Yep. So most of the audience, just to clarify, nanograms per milliliter is the US, and then nanomoles per liter is the Australian, UK. And there's probably more of an audience in the US here, so we're fine to talk in nanograms.
Okay, yeah. 60 to 80 or 150 to 200. Those are the ideal. That's what I really like, personally.
Dr. Gould, this topic keeps coming up. Abdi asks, is it impossible to have a healthy microbiome consuming a whole food, plant-based diet?
Nothing is impossible. I think it's very difficult because there were no vegan or vegetarian hunter-gatherers. They just didn't exist. It doesn't make any sense. Humans are not plant-based. We're animal-based. What made the leap between plants to animals is cholesterol. Cholesterol is a specific fat molecule that is really the glue that holds us together, that allowed us to be animals with flexibility, to be able to be disconnected from the earth and walk around. So I believe that even though we have this concept that plants are healthy and that eating a diet full of all these vegetables is really great, I think the evidence that I've seen is just not there to support that. I don't believe that anyone under the age of 21 should be on a vegetarian or vegan diet. I don't believe it's safe or healthy. I believe it's completely wrong. I understand the ideas of, not wanting to eat animals, but this is evolution. This is what Mother Nature did for us. We became the top of the food chain specifically because we figured out how to eat these animals that are the closest match to us, initially by cracking open bones and having bone marrow. And our bodies use fat as fuel. We do not use sugar as fuel. We can. That's not our fuel. Protein is not fuel for us. Your choice in your mitochondria is sugar or fat. I like to think of our bodies as a hybrid car, and the electricity is fat and the gas is sugar. So you can drive around your hybrid all day long burning sugar, but it causes pollution and it's not good for the engine. You don't want that noise and everything. You want to be in electricity, and that's what eating fat is. Burning fat is our primary fuel source because we store it. That's what your mitochondria wants. It wants organic grass-fed fat. Biggest problem with the vegetarian issues is that glyphosate and many other similar herbicides, pesticides are infected in our food. You can't smell them. You can't see it. You can't taste it. No one's testing for it. And some of the products that I've personally tested, some of the protein powders that allow somebody to be a vegetarian and not eat animal-based foods, these are highly infected with glyphosate. And glyphosate is an antibiotic. It will kill off your the gut microbiome. It will be destroyed by glyphosate, and it will selectively kill off the bacteria that you don't want dead. So I think that it's possible. I think it's much too difficult. And I think that if you, to be able to keep a healthy gut microbiome, it's possible, but it's unlikely. I think it's the amount of work that you'd have to do and the amount of research would be very, very difficult. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, it absolutely did. It's a difficult one. But going back to Price, he showed specifically that each culture made sure that they had these prized and animal raised foods and animal foods themselves because they contain fat soluble vitamins, and you just don't get the fat soluble vitamins from anything but an animal that's raised on pastoral and natural sunlight. There's no way around that one. And when we're talking about the physiology that runs the gut and the brain, it just you really have to consider how our body requires these nutrients.
Yeah, fascinating that Price noticed and all the different, the different communities. They knew when they had young people who wanted to conceive, they knew to feed them those prized foods. Really, really cool. The collective, memory of the tribe is really, really incredible. It's a shame that we lost so much of that, in the early 1930s.
Well, it's still there, and it's coming out so well and new. So there's hope yet, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Claudia asked, does vitamin D deficiency cause sleep apnea, or sleep apnea cause vitamin D deficiency? What's your take on that?
So that's a great question because both of things are true. I like to think of vitamin D as a metabolic hormone. And the reason is if you're extremely active and you're wearing up your body, you're going to create inflammation. Vitamin D is used up to allow you to make anti-inflammatory enzymes. So if you're under a great deal of stress, then you're going to be using up more of your vitamin D. But in the old days, you would be out hunting during the day, presumably under sunlight. So if you're being more active, you're getting more vitamin D. Now, what I see is that vitamin D deficiency itself is the root cause or one of the root causes of sleep apnea. However, once you have sleep apnea, it will lower your vitamin D because you are essentially, when you have sleep apnea, you're stopping breathing, and then your body is literally going into that fight or flight reaction when it should be resting and digesting. And if you have bad apnea, you are getting aroused over and over all night long. And that's like running a marathon at the exact time that you should be resting and regenerating. So it really uses up the vitamin D. I don't have a lot of definitive proof, but there was a study that they showed where when they had somebody wear a CPAP, their vitamin D level came up, which made sense to me because if you're not being chased by a tiger all night long, and you'll be able to rest, then you're not going to utilize and use up all the chemicals that you're supposed to be making when you sleep. So hopefully that answers that question. It's a bit of both. The interesting part is that the apnea syndrome is the easiest to reverse at the soonest stage. If a child has apnea, simple supplementation of vitamin D and K2 and magnesium alone can reverse it almost immediately. The longer you've had the syndrome, the harder it is to reverse. And I believe it's 100% reversible. It's just not easy. And there's a lot of factors that make it more difficult. So hopefully that answered that question.
That was a great explanation. And, as you said before, this is a complex syndrome and, people experience it in different ways. And especially sleep apnea, where the craniofacial type and the way we breathe, influences the types of apneas we get and then the syndromes that we experience. It makes total sense that there's different connections happening. Dr. Gould, let's start to bring this into how you're seeing this and helping patients in your practice now. We're talking about kids and early intervention, which I just think is so important. Tell us about this presentation of kids with this syndrome that you're seeing in your practice. What are parents experiencing seeing, and how are you going about helping them with it?
Right. Well, so the syndrome looks different at different ages and stages, and that's literally why I created the victims of the epidemic. And these are caricatures that I created with one of my patients who's an artist to show you what this syndrome looks like at different ages and stages. And the symptoms are different. So the book that you see behind me, it's available for free for download from my website at modernhuntergatherers.com. And you can scroll through the different victims, and something's going to jump out at you. So when we look at kids, they're going to present with these symptoms: swollen tonsils, multiple colds and flus, bruxism, clenching and grinding or snoring, poor sleep, ADHD, warts, viral infections, and delayed growth. So those are the classic presentations of, I call that pediatrician's blight. That's my caricature. And when we see those kids, something as simple as giving them vitamin D supplements, changing their diet, giving them more of a whole foods diet, it can profoundly change them. And they get, basically, I call them transformation stories. So pediatrician's blight changes to pediatrician's delight. And so these are the kids that are always going in to the pediatrician. They're always having colds and flus, Kawasaki syndrome, all these weird things that happens to kids. Most of it comes down to this specific thing. And then also the kids who have decay, a lot of dental crowding, or who have a tongue thrust swallow, who, if you ask your child to swallow, they have to close their lips. If you try and stop them, they can't. They have to close, their tongue has to go forward to close their airway to swallow. So, and those are the kids with delayed dental growth. And then the kids who need to go to the orthodontist at age 6 or 7 to widen the palate, the very high, narrow palate. Those are the classic symptoms. And then the next stage up is going to be, I have terrible teen, transforms to terrific teen. That's going to be acne. It's going to be insomnia, poor sleep, all the things that the kids get to that 13, 14, they get to be really kind of unmanageable. And, that's how it plays out at those ages. So, anyone can check that out. See, just, it looks different at different ages and stages. And hopefully that made sense. So definitely childhood bruxism, a lot of decay, and sleep issues.
It's great that you've characterized it like that, because, as you say, it really kind of hits people in a certain way when they say, hang on, this is my child, this is exactly their life. And so, putting it together for parents like that really can be very powerful. So we'll bring that up right at the end too.
Sure.
Christina asks, what supplementation of vitamin D would be possible to reduce enlarged tonsils to avoid surgery? Do you think that surgery plays a role? What's your take on that?
So tonsil size is inversely proportional to vitamin D status. I have 3 studies that show that. So what that means is that the lower the vitamin D, the bigger the tonsils. Now, if you have a child who has very large tonsils and you supplement their vitamin D to an evolutionary level, to 100 at least, maybe 150, we see resolution all the time. One of my dental assistants was told she needed surgery. Her daughter needed surgery. She was 13. Never had a vitamin D test, never had a supplement. We supplemented her. We didn't actually even get a level. I just told her what dose to take. And I said, give it 3 months, and the tonsils resolved and she never needed to have surgery. Sometimes past a certain point, no vitamin D is going to help. There's always, the cases that are going to require surgery. But I wouldn't do surgery on a child unless they have that higher vitamin D level, because even the post-op, the healing, the surgical experience, you want your child's vitamin D level to be high because it regulates the immune system. You don't want your child going into a hospital with low vitamin D. Hospital infections are real, and the people who get them are the people with a low vitamin D. Those are the superbugs. Those are the people who are affected. So the answer to the question is, depends on the age, depends on the level. But before I would do any surgery, I consider any surgery like a tonsillectomy, I hate to say this, but I consider it mutilation. And we can do it. Sometimes people need surgery. They have a deviated septum. They can't breathe through their nose. Going to have surgery. They have turbinates that are just not letting air through. They have to have surgery. But I want to run down the natural opportunities that I have before I'm going to go to anything that's tonsillar tissue is important. I don't want to remove it if I don't have to. So I would definitely try 3 months at a level of over 100, preferably 150, to see if they resolve. And you may have a hard time finding a doctor who wants to go along with that, but everyone should have a choice. At least the information should be out there. Don't hesitate to test your child vitamin D more frequently. Here in the US, we have at-home testing. You can puncture and send in a blood spot so you can get your child's level. We've done it with patients where they'll take their child and get their toe and get a blood spot and send it in, because we don't want to take blood from kids. It's kind of it's not something that we do on a regular basis. It's not easy. So hopefully that's useful information.
Absolutely, and the point about building up your vitamin D levels before going in for a surgery is so poignant, because, as you say, we're starting to interface this with implant surgery. That better quality bone comes from people with better source of nutrients within their own system. So it makes total sense that if you do have to go through a surgery, that you should be thinking about building up your own resistance, because your body has to go through a healing process. So that's a great point that I haven't heard anyone bring up before. Dr. Gould, Laura asked, what supplements do you recommend for children?
Mine, of course. No, I've been in development. So I have, at this point in time, there's a couple of companies that make chewable D3K2. Something that I've been trying to develop is a line of sugar-free chewable vitamins, because I'm a dentist. But at this point in time, you can always just take either the vitamin D, you can puncture them and put them into your children's milk or juice with K2 as well. So you may have to do this at home. Here we have Nordic Naturals is the only company that has a D3K2 gummy. And I think it's 2000 IU with 90 micrograms of K2, which I think is a great supplement. And that's the one that I recommend. I have a product that I'm trying to get out there. It's called Soul Candy. It's vitamin D3, vitamin K2, magnesium with MCT oil, and prebiotics. That's a chewable, sugar-free chocolate candy. I'm really trying to get that product out there because there really aren't a lot of good options. Everyone's talking about intermittent fasting and time-restricted feeding, and you never want to starve your child. I developed a chocolate candy that will keep you full for a while. So rather than having cereal or some processed carbohydrates, that you could have this type of chocolate. And so hopefully I'll get it out there, but there aren't really a lot of good ones. So you can just slip it into your kids' food in that way. I'm not sure if there's anything available in Australia. I haven't seen that.
A great point too, in terms of these nutrients are absorbed with fat, so they should always be coupled with fat. So finding a supplement or yours when it's ready.
Hopefully,
so that the body absorbs it. Yeah, I mean, like there's lots out there. And obviously people have to work with their physician and with their own individual needs too. Right. Dr. Gould, you're working on a lot of projects to help this information get out there. What are some of the most powerful tools you've found, or how do you see this panning out? This is a big problem we've discussed. It talks about how our species really has gone down a few notches since when Weston A. Price was walking the globe. Right. How do you feel that we start to fix this? And you've done a lot of work to get this message out there. What are the things that you feel that parents and even people like yourself that are suffering from these problems can do to really change this?
It's a tough one. So you have to understand. So I really examined, when I started, to me, when I saw this whole syndrome, it was very obvious to me. I really tried to convince some people, and no one really has an extra space, especially with COVID or after COVID, has an extra space in their life to do things that are going to be difficult. So I went back to what did Weston Price do that really would have been successful today, putting pictures in his book. What's the next step? So what I wanted to do was bring in the modern media. So I'm focused on bringing this information to the general public in a fun and memorable way. So I created these iconic cartoon characters you see behind me. One of my, I got a 90-minute movie called Enzymes, the Worker Bees of Biology. Imagine Finding Nemo, except with fish. Instead of fish, it's enzymes, because people have heard of enzymes and they kind of know maybe what it is, but I'm trying to put a memorable face and a way to remember your health. So I've got my character behind me is Marty Mitochondria, and that's your mitochondria. That's how your body generates electricity or energy, human electricity. And my characters sing and dance. And I want to bring this into popular culture because right now brings me to what how I contacted you is that what is popular is what's on TikTok. What is popular is what sells. Kids want to buy toys and different things that are going to be the most exciting to them. And I examined the kids market and watched the cartoons, and it's terrible because people are creating a toy and then they're making up a cartoon to sell the toy. And I said to myself that what I remember as a kid was Schoolhouse Rock. I don't know if you guys had Schoolhouse Rock in Australia. Does anyone listen to this in the US or Canada? This is taking any idea and making it into a song, a dance, or something fun so it becomes memorable and can become ingrained in society. So I looked at what was going on, and what's kind of interesting is that we have our popular culture, our celebrities. And so Cardi B is somebody that everyone knows, or I was not a big Cardi B fan. I didn't know what her work was, but kids are all doing this WAP song, WAP dance. And one of my patients came to me and said, my 11-year-old is singing the words to the WAP song, and I'd never heard of it. And when I saw it, I was just mortified. And I said to myself, this is an opportunity to substitute. And WAP, Weston A. Price, came into my mind, and I said, we can make a play on this and take something that's embarrassing and not appropriate for children, and let's take something that can be fun. So that's why I did a song and a dance so it can be on TikTok, and that's why I actually, no pressure because I know you've got a lot going on in your personal life, but I challenge you to do the WAP dance as the Weston A. Price dance, not the other one, because whether you wanted to know it or not, kids 11-year-olds are seeing this. I wanted to give them an alternate narrative. I wanted to give them something more fun. My one of my associate dentist kids was so excited about Finding Nemo and all this stuff, and I brought her pictures of my enzymes and my different cartoon characters, and she fell in love with them just exactly in the same way, except that rather than just doing nothing, these cartoon characters, they tell a story. You're going to hear Kathy Cholesterol sing her song, I've Got Your Back. It's a love song from the molecule of cholesterol to you as a person to let you understand that cholesterol isn't your enemy. It's one of your best friends. So the only way to, I can say this, you should be eating more red meat and having higher cholesterol. People would be like, you're crazy. My doctor's telling me the opposite. I want to hear 3, 5, 7 years from now, kids say, when I heard Kathy Cholesterol sing I Got Your Back, I fell in love with her because she reminded me of me. I want to go to children and get them early so they can understand and be excited about science and be excited about the physical world around us and how our bodies work, because it's really no different. Kids learn and memorize video games, the most useless information. Let's put this stuff out there that's more interesting, that's more informative. And I included all my cartoons to be both adult friendly and child friendly, because the adults are going to learn from the children and vice versa. And my caricatures and my cartoons, they're not meant for kids, they're meant for everyone. The way I used to watch the Roadrunner and the Coyote. And if you're a kid, it's a good show for you. If you're an adult, it's very tongue-in-cheek humor. And that's what I really wanted to create. I really wanted to be able to bring this just such obvious information out into popular culture. And that's what you're going to find when you look into my work. I've got a lot of my book that's available. It's just a preview for all my other stuff. I want to make this part of culture and make it fun. Not like, we got to learn science. I don't care. I want people to be singing the songs. Character behind me, or this side, is deuterium. No one knows what deuterium is. It's a stable hydrogen isotope. But when you hear deuterium sing his song, it's called Deplete Me. And I want people to be singing the words and humming the tune before they really get what the science means. And it's being a bit tricky. I'm being a bit subversive here, but my intentions are good. I want to take what Weston Price did by putting his photographs in that book and kick it up to 2021 and the way we live now. The world's a different place. Got to get information out in a completely different way.
Dr. Gould, it's so true that people are visual learners, especially children. So, it's great that you've kind of gone down this road to help people digest. This is complex information. We went through at the start of this interview, how complex these systems are, but we're trying to get it to a very, very simple level. And I think, are these books and education tools, are they things that you developed that you helped in your practice? Like, did you find this helped with your patients, and that's how you've gone on the road to publishing these tools?
Well, so sort of yes and no. So I collaborated with artists and musicians to create these because I wanted to infuse the science into the characters. So I met with my artist and I explained the personality of the different characters and what they would be like. And he was able to create these really iconic images that tell more of a story. So when you actually delve into, you see Marty Mitochondria has got a lightning bolt on him. But when you look deeper, there's little round things, and those are the nanomotors. Those are the little spinning rotors that creates ATP, or Mother Nature's electricity in our body. And so I wanted to really infuse the science into them. And my video game is called Deuterium Depletion. It's where all my cartoon characters go to battle in your mitochondria at the electron transport chain in the inner mitochondrial matrix. So this is the matrix. The matrix is real. It's not a movie. It's going on inside your body, your mitochondria. So I wanted to really infuse this. I've been a dentist for 31 years. I want to spend the next 30 years of my life sharing this information and letting children be excited about science. So when kids play a video game, they learn all the different rules. In this case, they'll be learning the different characters' powers. So they're going to be learning science by just playing the video games. The character is SOD, superoxide dismutase. Enos is my main lead character. It's endothelial nitric oxide synthase. When your 6 or 5-year-old starts to talk like that, it's going to scare people, but this is a good thing because they're going to be able to learn this so that it's just natural to them. And so I created all this, not so much for my own practice, but I don't want a child to go through what I went through. My life was wasted, 34 years of shame and pain, literally for nothing. And it's my reason for living is to share this at such a higher level so that it can, this information, it was hidden from me, it was hidden from you, and it's still being hidden from our medical professionals. I wanted to put this out there in a way so this information cannot be subverted or hidden ever again, so that it becomes part of our regular language that we use. And I wanted people to say, I've got my caricatures, angry man syndrome. I wanted someone to say, my boss has angry man syndrome. So I have a bit off a pretty big chunk here. I want this information to take root so that it becomes part of popular culture. And the way I sort of think about it is, we talked about, being a modern hunter-gatherer. My book is called The Modern Epidemic. What is the cure to the modern epidemic? It's called tribal life. It's emulating the behaviors of our ancestors without having to move back into the wild. So it's doing certain things. I have something called radiation rules, watching the sunrise, watching the sunset, being aware of your radiation around you. So it's really incorporating, taking our modern lives and trying to incorporate healthful things without having to, do things that are completely disruptive to your modern life. So
it makes total sense. And, I just want to thank you, Dr. Gould, for, your journey and inquiring mind to unpin a lot of these things, because a lot of these issues need a practitioner's analysis to kind of really understand what's going on. And then the effort and thought to be able to bring that in a digestible format, it's very difficult. And so I want to thank you for that. And, I really, I look forward to how this plays out, because I really believe it's an important message that kids need to hear. Where can people find your book and your programs?
Right. So my website is modernhuntergatherers.com with an S. Everyone puts Modern Hunter Gatherer, but there's an S there. Or my name, Joel Gould. If you go to that website, I sell my vitamins. I sell blue blockers, which is important for circadian rhythms. And I sell things because if something isn't successful, no one's going to care about it. So obviously I have a lot of merchandising. And go to that website and go to my dental website is Modern American Dentistry. And I do have a new feature that will be coming up that you can book a consultation with me to discuss your sleep. I have a YouTube channel, modernhuntergatherers.com. I have a lot of videos out there. I have 3 books that I'm hoping to publish as soon as possible, but I'll self-publish. I've been in negotiation with some publishers, but as you know, you've got a great book out there. You know how hard it is to get a book done through a traditional publisher. So I'll probably be breaking up my books into different ebooks that'll be available for download or minimal cost, because this information is overwhelming and I want to just keep it into bite-sized chunks. I call it infotainment, because you want to learn something, but you also don't want to be doing work. I don't want to be, at the end of my long, busy day, I don't want to be doing extra work. So Joel Gould, modernhuntergatherers.com. And I still do my own Instagram. Instagram is modern_hunter_gatherers. I still respond to my audience, and I love taking questions. And I'm at the stage of my life where I really like hearing the feedback from people. And a lot of people will contact me saying, I had all these weird symptoms and no doctor knew what was wrong with me. And I heard your podcast and it just clicked. So that's what I want to hear. I want to hear more people finding this out. So everyone, please share my information. That's why I made my ebook free. You won't find all the answers in the ebook, but you'll find a lot of really great information. Towards the end, I put a lot of guidelines, peer-reviewed studies, and different charts of different recommendations of vitamin D levels, how to calculate it, and all that. So if you scroll to the end of the ebook, the last couple of pages are really more information that you can incorporate into your life immediately. I really look forward to bringing this information out and making it as much fun as possible.
Well, Dr. Gould, I can't underscore how important I think your work is and how this message has to go forward. So thank you again for sharing the time with us, and I really look forward to seeing how all this plays out. And, you know, I'm hopeful that this information can get out so that the next generation can really not experience these diseases as you've described them. Thank you, Dr. Gould, again, and I look forward to chatting to you soon.
Fantastic. I always like to end this by saying the future is bright. Thank you.
Absolutely agree. Thanks, Dr. Gould.